Chapter 11. Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh-Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve you. Nahash the Ammonite said to them, On this condition will I make it with you, that all your right eyes be put out, and I will lay it for a reproach on all Israel. The elders of Jabesh said to him, Give us 7 days' rest, that we may send messengers to all the borders of Israel, and then, if there be none to save us, we will come out to you. Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul, and spoke these words in the ears of the people. And all the people lifted up their voice and wept. Behold, Saul came following the oxen out of the field, and Saul said, What ails the people that they weep? They told him the words of the men of Jabesh. The Spirit of God came mightily on Saul when he heard those words, and his anger was kindled greatly. He took a yoke of oxen, and cut them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the borders of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, Whoever doesn't come forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen. The dread of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out as one man. He numbered them in Bezek, and the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. They said to the messengers who came, Thus shall you tell the men of Jabesh-Gilead, Tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you shall have deliverance. The messengers came and told the men of Jabesh, and so they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, Tomorrow we will come out to you, and you shall do with us all that seems good to you. It was so on the next day, that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch, and struck the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it happened that those who remained were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. The people said to Samuel, Who is he who said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men, that we may put them to death. Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord has worked deliverance in Israel. Then Samuel said to the people, Come, and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord, in Gilgal, and there they offered sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. Chapter 12. Samuel said to all Israel, Behold, I have listened to your voice and all that you said to me, and have made a king over you. Now, behold, the king walks before you, and I am old and gray-headed, and behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my youth to this day. Here I am, witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or of whose hand have I taken a ransom to blind my eyes? And I will restore it to you. They said, You have not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither have you taken anything of any man's hand. He said to them, The Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. They said, He is witness. Samuel said to the people, It is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron, and that brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Now therefore stand still, that I may plead with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous acts of the Lord, which he did to you and to your fathers. When Jacob was come into Egypt, and your fathers cried to the Lord, then the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought forth your fathers out of Egypt, and made them to dwell in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God, and he sold them into the hand of Sisera, captain of the host of Hazor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. They cried to the Lord and said, We have sinned, because we have forsaken the Lord, and have served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. But now deliver us out of the hand of our enemies, and we will serve you. The Lord sent Jerubbaal, and Badon, and Jephthah, and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you lived in safety. When you saw that Nahash the king of the children of Ammon came against you, you said to me, No, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king. Now therefore see the king whom you have chosen, and whom you have asked for, and behold, the Lord has set a king over you. If you will fear the Lord, and serve him, and listen to his voice, and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, both you and also the king who reigns over you are followers of the Lord your God, well. But if you will not listen to the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then will the hand of the Lord be against you as it was against your fathers. Now therefore stand still, and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Isn't it wheat harvest today? I will call to the Lord, that he may send thunder and rain, and you shall know and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking you a king. So Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. All the people said to Samuel, Pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we not die, for we have added this to all our sins, to ask us a king. Samuel said to the people, Don't be afraid. You have indeed done all this evil, yet don't turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart, and don't turn aside, for then would you go after vain things, which can't profit or deliver, for they are vain. The Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you a people to himself. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you. But I will instruct you in the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord, and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider how great things he has done for you. But if you shall still do wickedly, you shall be consumed, both you and your king. Chapter 13. Saul was 40 years old when he began to reign, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, of which 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash, and in the mount of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin, and the rest of the people he sent, every man to his tent. Jonathan struck the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, Let the Hebrews hear. All Israel heard that Saul had struck the garrison of the Philistines, and also that Israel was had an abomination with the Philistines. The people were gathered together after Saul to Gilgal. The Philistines assembled themselves together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots, and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the open seashore in multitude. And they came up and encamped in Michmash, eastward of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were distressed, then the people did hide themselves in caves, and in thickets, and in rocks, and in coverts, and in pits. Now some of the Hebrews had gone over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. But as for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. He stayed 7 days, according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel didn't come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. Saul said, Bring here the burnt offering to me and the peace offerings. He offered the burnt offering. It came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him that he might greet him. Samuel said, What have you done? Saul said, Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that you didn't come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines assembled themselves together at Michmash. Therefore I said, Now will the Philistines come down on me to Gilgal, and I haven't entreated the favor of the Lord. I forced myself therefore and offered the burnt offering. Samuel said to Saul, You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God which he commanded you. For now would the Lord have established your kingdom on Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept that which the Lord commanded you. Samuel arose, and got him up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. Saul numbered the people who were present with him, about 600 men. Saul and Jonathan his son, and the people who were present with them, abode in Geba of Benjamin. But the Philistines encamped in Michmash. The spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned to the way that leads to Ophrah, to the land of Shual. And another company turned the way to Beth-horon. And another company turned the way of the border that looks down on the valley of Zeboim, toward the wilderness. Now there was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, Lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. But all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen every man his plowshare, mattock, axe, and sickle. Yet they had a file for the mattocks, and for the plowshares, and for the forks, and for the axes, and to set the goads. So it came to pass in the day of battle, that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan. But with Saul and Jonathan, his son, there was found one. The garrison of the Philistines went out of the pass to Michmash. Chapter 14. Now it fell on a day that Jonathan the son of Saul said to the young man who bore his armor, Come, and let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he didn't tell his father. Saul abode in the uttermost part of Gibeah, under the pomegranate tree which is in Migron, and the people who were with him were about 600 men. And Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. The people didn't know that Jonathan was gone. Between the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistines' garrison, there was a rocky crag on the one side, and a rocky crag on the other side, and the name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other Seneh. The one crag rose up on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba. Jonathan said to the young men who bore his armor, Come, and let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. His armor-bearer said to him, Do all that is in your heart. Turn, behold, I am with you according to your heart. Then Jonathan said, Look, we will pass over to the men, and we will disclose ourselves to them. If they say to us, Wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place, and will not go up to them. But if they say, Come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this shall be the sign to us. Both of them revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, Look, the Hebrews come out of their holes where they had hid themselves. The men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor-bearer and said, Come up to us, and we will show you a thing. Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, Come up after me, for the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan climbed up on his hands and on his feet, and his armor-bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer killed them after him. That first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made, was about 20 men, within as it were half a furrow's length in an acre of land. There was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people, the garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked, so that there was an exceedingly great trembling. The watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went here and there. Then Saul said to the people who were with him, Look now and see who has gone from us. When they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. Saul said to Ahijah, Bring here the ark of God. For the ark of God was there at that time with the children of Israel. It happened, while Saul talked to the priest, that the tumult that was in the camp of the Philistines went on and increased. And Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Saul and all the people who were with him were gathered together and came to the battle. And behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great confusion. Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines as before, and who went up with them into the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise all the men of Israel who had hid themselves in the hill country of Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, even they also followed hard after them in the battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over by Beth-aven. The men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had adjured the people, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats any food until it be evening, and I be avenged on my enemies." So none of the people tasted food. All the people came into the forest, and there was honey on the ground. When the people were come to the forest, behold, the honey dropped, but no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan didn't hear when his father charged the people with the oath. Therefore he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand, and dipped it in the honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. Then answered one of the people and said, "Your father directly charged the people with an oath, saying, 'Cursed be the man who eats food this day.'" The people were faint. Then Jonathan said, "My father has troubled the land. Please look how my eyes have been enlightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. How much more, if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they have found? For now there has been no great slaughter among the Philistines." They struck of the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ajalon. The people were very faint, and the people flew on the spoil, and took sheep and oxen and calves, and killed them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. Then they told Saul, saying, "Look, the people sin against the Lord, in that they eat with the blood." He said, "You have dealt treacherously. Roll a great stone to me this day." Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the people, and tell them, Bring here every man his ox, and every man his sheep, and kill them here and eat, and don't sin against the Lord in eating with the blood." All the people brought every man his ox with him that night, and killed them there. Saul built an altar to the Lord. The same was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night, and take spoil among them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man of them." They said, "Do whatever seems good to you." Then the priest said, "Let us draw near here to God." Saul asked counsel of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" But he didn't answer him that day. Saul said, "Draw near here, all you chiefs of the people, and know and see in which this sin has been this day. For as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die." But there was not a man among all the people who answered him. Then he said to all Israel, "Be you on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side." The people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." Therefore Saul said to the Lord, the God of Israel, "Show the right." Jonathan and Saul were taken by lot, but the people escaped. Saul said, "Cast lots between me and Jonathan my son." Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." Jonathan told him and said, "I did certainly taste a little honey with the end of the rod that was in my hand, and behold, I must die?" Saul said, "God do so and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan." The people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has worked this great salvation in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, that he didn't die. Then Saul went up from following the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Now when Saul had taken the kingdom over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, and against all the children of Ammon, and against Edom, and against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines, and wherever he turned himself, he put them to the worse. He did valiantly and struck the Amalekites, and delivered Israel out of the hands of those who despoiled them. Now the sons of Saul were Jonathan, and Ishvi, and Malchishua, and the names of his 2 daughters were these, the name of the firstborn Merab, and the name of the younger Michal. And the name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, the daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the captain of the host was Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. There was hard war against the Philistines all the days of Saul, and when Saul saw any mighty man or any valiant man, he took him to him. Chapter 15. Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore listen to the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of armies, I have marked that which Amalek did to Israel, how he set himself against him in the way when he came up out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and don't spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." Saul summoned the people, and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 footmen, and 10,000 men of Judah. Saul came to the city of Amalek, and laid wait in the valley. Saul said to the Kenites, "Go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you have shown kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt." So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. Saul struck the Amalekites from Havilah as you go to Shur, that is before Egypt. He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep and of the oxen, and of the fatlings and the lambs, and all that was good, and wouldn't utterly destroy them. But everything that was vile and refuse, that they utterly destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, "It grieves me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he has turned back from following me, and has not performed my commandments." Samuel was angry, and he cried to the Lord all night. Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, and it was told Samuel, saying, "Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument, and turned and passed on, and went down to Gilgal." Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed are you by the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord." Samuel said, "What means then this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen, to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." Then Samuel said to Saul, "Stay, and I will tell you what the Lord has said to me this night." He said to him, "Say on." Samuel said, "Though you were little in your own sight, weren't you made the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a journey and said, 'Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed.' Why then didn't you obey the voice of the Lord, but flew on the spoil, and did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord?" Saul said to Samuel, "Yes, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Lord has sent me, and have bought Agag the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the chief of the devoted things, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." Samuel said, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as idolatry and the teraphim. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now therefore, please pardon my sin, and turn again with me that I may worship the Lord. Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. As Samuel turned about to go away, Saul laid hold on the skirt of his robe, and it tore. Samuel said to him, The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day, and has given it to a neighbor of yours, who is better than you. Also the strength of Israel will not lie nor repent, for he is not a man that he should repent. Then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people, and before Israel, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord your God. So Samuel turned again after Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. Then Samuel said, Bring here to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites. Agag came to him cheerfully. Agag said, Surely the bitterness of death is past. Samuel said, As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. Samuel hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house to Gibeah of Saul. Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death, for Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord grieved that he had made Saul king over Israel. Chapter 16. The Lord said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. The Lord said, Take a heifer with you and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. Call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint to me him whom I name to you. Samuel did that which the Lord spoke, and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling, and said, Do you come peaceably? He said, Peaceably I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. He sanctified Jesse and his sons, and called them to the sacrifice. It happened, when they had come, that he looked at Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, Don't look on his face, or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel. He said, Neither has the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by. He said, Neither has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. Samuel said to Jesse, The Lord has not chosen these. Samuel said to Jesse, Are these all your children? He said, There remains yet the youngest, and behold, he is keeping the sheep. Samuel said to Jesse, Send and get him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. He sent, and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and of a beautiful face, and handsome to look on. The Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily on David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. Saul's servants said to him, See now, an evil spirit from God troubles you. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is a skillful player on the harp. And it shall happen, when the evil spirit from God is on you, that he shall play with his hand, and you shall be well. Saul said to his servants, Provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the young men and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, and a mighty man of valor, and a man of war, and prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him." Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me David your son, who is with the sheep." Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son to Saul. David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. Saul sent to Jesse, saying, "Please let David stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight." It happened, when the evil spirit from God was on Saul, that David took the harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. Chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and they were gathered together at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah, in Ephes Damim. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and encamped in the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. There went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath, of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of brass on his head, and he was clad with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. He had brass shin armor on his legs, and a javelin of brass between his shoulders. The staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield-bearer went before him. He stood and cried to the armies of Israel, and said to them, "Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and you servants to Saul? Choose a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." The Philistine said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And the man was an old man in the days of Saul, stricken in years among men. The 3 eldest sons of Jesse had gone after Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. Now David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. The Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. Jesse said to David his son, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain, and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp for your brothers, and bring these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and take their pledge." Now Saul, and they, and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the place of the wagons, as the host which was going forth to the fight shouted for the battle. Israel and the Philistines put the battle in array, army against army. David left his baggage in the hand of the keeper of the baggage, and ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the ranks of the Philistines, and spoke according to the same words, and David heard them. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were very afraid. The men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, "What shall be done to the man who kills this Philistine, and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? The people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man who kills him. Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why are you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride, and the naughtiness of your heart, for you have come down that you might see the battle. David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? He turned away from him toward another, and spoke after the same manner, and the people answered him again after the former manner. When the words were heard which David spoke, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Saul said to David, You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. David said to Saul, Your servant was keeping his father's sheep, and when there came a lion or a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after him and struck him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and struck him, and killed him. Your servant struck both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. David said, The Lord who delivered me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord shall be with you. Saul clad David with his clothing, and he put a helmet of brass on his head, and he clad him with a coat of mail. David girded his sword on his clothing, and he tried to go, for he had not proved it. David said to Saul, I can't go with these, for I have not proved them. David put them off him. He took his staff in his hand, and chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his wallet, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. When the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and fair of face. The Philistine said to David, Am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks? The Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky, and to the animals of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day will the Lord deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you, and take your head from off you. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky, and to the wild animals of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord doesn't save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. It happened, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, and took there a stone, and slung it, and struck the Philistine in his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines, until you come to Gai, and to the gates of Ekron. The wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Sharaim, even to Gath and to Ekron. The children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. When Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the captain of the host, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" Abner said, "As your soul lives, O king, I can't tell." The king said, "Inquire whose son the young man is." As David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." Chapter 18. It happened, when he had made an end of speaking to Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him go any more to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his clothing, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his sash. David went out wherever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely, and Saul set him over the men of war. And it was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. It happened as they came, when David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with joy, and with instruments of music. The women sang one to another as they played, and said, "Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s." Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him, and he said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. What can he have more but the kingdom itself?" Saul eyed David from that day forward. It happened on the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily on Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house, and David played with his hand as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, "I will strike David even to the wall." David hid out of his presence twice. Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, and was departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from him, and made him his captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he stood in awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Saul said to David, "Behold, my elder daughter Merab, I will give her as wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul said, "Don't let my hand be on him, but let the hand of the Philistines be on him." David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my life, or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" But it happened at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel the Mahalathite as wife. Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul said, "I will give her to him, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Therefore Saul said to David, "You shall this day be my son-in-law a second time." Saul commanded his servants, saying, "Commune with David secretly, and say, Behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law." Saul's servants spoke those words in the ear of David. David said, "Does it seem to you a light thing to be the king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed?" Saul's servants told him what David said. Saul said, "This is what you shall tell David. The king desires no dowry except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged on the king's enemies." Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. When his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. The days were not expired, and David arose and went, he and his men, and killed of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full number to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. Saul gave him Michal his daughter as wife. Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. Saul was more afraid of David, and Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it happened, as often as they went forth, that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was always talked about. Chapter 19. Saul spoke to Jonathan his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted in David. Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeks to kill you. Now therefore please take care of yourself in the morning, and live in a secret place, and hide yourself, and I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will commune with my father about you, and if I see anything I will tell you. Jonathan spoke good of David to Saul his father, and said to him, Don't let the king sin against his servant, against David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his works have been very good toward you, for he put his life in his hand, and struck the Philistine. And the Lord worked a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and did rejoice. Why then will you sin against innocent blood, to kill David without a cause? Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. Jonathan called David, and Jonathan told him all those things. Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. There was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines, and killed them with a very great slaughter, and they fled before him. An evil spirit from the Lord was on Saul, as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing with his hand. Saul sought to strike David, even to the wall with the spear, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, and to kill him in the morning, and Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, If you don't save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be slain. So Michal let David down through the window, and he went and fled and escaped. Michal took the teraphim, and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair at the head of it, and covered it with the clothes. When Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, He is sick. Saul sent the messengers to see David, saying, Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him. When the messengers came in, behold, the teraphim was in the bed, with the pillow of goat's hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, Why have you deceived me, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? Michal answered Saul, He said to me, Let me go, why should I kill you? Now David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. He and Samuel went and lived in Naioth. It was told Saul, saying, Behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. Saul sent messengers to take David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing his head over them, the Spirit of God came on the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. When it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they also prophesied. Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they also prophesied. Then he went himself to Ramah, and came to the great well that is in Seku, and he asked and said, Where are Samuel and David? One said, Behold, they are at Naioth in Ramah. He went there to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God came on him also, and he went on, and prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. He also stripped off his clothes, and he also prophesied before Samuel, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Therefore they say, Is Saul also among the prophets? Chapter 20. David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, What have I done, and what is my iniquity? What is my sin before your father, that he seeks my life? He said to him, Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either small or great, but that he tells it to me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." David swore moreover and said, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he says, 'Don't let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved.' But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever your soul desires, I will do it for you." David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat. But let me go that I may hide myself in the field to the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked leave of me that he might run to Bethlehem to his city, for it is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family.' If he says, 'It is well,' your servant shall have peace. But if he is angry, then know that evil is determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there be in me iniquity, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father?" Jonathan said, "Far be it from you, for if I should at all know that evil were determined by my father to come on you, then wouldn't I tell you that?" Then David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly?" Jonathan said to David, "Come and let us go out into the field." They went out, both of them, into the field. Jonathan said to David, "The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have asked my father about this time tomorrow, or the third day, behold, if there be good toward David, shall I not then send to you and tell it to you? The Lord do so to Jonathan and more also, should it please my father to do you evil, if I don't disclose it to you, and send you away that you may go in peace, and the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. You shall, not only while I yet live, show me the loving kindness of the Lord, that I not die, but also you shall not cut off your kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord has cut off the enemies of David, every one from the surface of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "The Lord will require it at the hand of David's enemies." Jonathan caused David to swear again for the love that he had to him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. When you have stayed 3 days, you shall go down quickly, and come to the place where you did hide yourself when the business was at hand, and shall remain by the stone Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows on the side of it as though I shot at a mark. Behold, I will send the boy, saying, 'Go, find the arrows.' If I tell the boy, 'Behold, the arrows are on this side of you, take them and come,' then there is peace to you and no hurt, as the Lord lives. But if I say this to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go your way, for the Lord has sent you away. As touching the matter which you and I have spoken of, behold, the Lord is between you and I forever." So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon was come, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat as at other times, even on the seat by the wall. And Jonathan stood up, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul didn't say anything that day, for he thought, "Something has happened to him. He is not clean. Surely he's not clean." It happened on the next day after the new moon, which was the second day, that David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, "Why doesn't the son of Jesse come to meat, neither yesterday nor today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem, and he said, 'Please let me go, for our family has a sacrifice in the city, and my brother, he has commanded me to be there. And now if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away, I pray you, and see my brothers.' Therefore he has not come to the king's table." Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, don't I know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom. Therefore send now and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Jonathan answered Saul his father and said to him, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Saul cast his spear at him to strike him. By this Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and ate no food the 2nd day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. It happened in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David, and a little boy with him. He said to his boy, "Run, find now the arrows which I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried after the boy and said, "Isn't the arrow past you?" Jonathan cried after the boy, "Go fast, hurry, don't delay." Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master, but the boy didn't know anything. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said to him, "Go, carry them to the city." As soon as the boy was gone, David arose out of a place toward the south, and fell on his face to the ground, and bowed himself 3 times, and they kissed one another and wept with one another, until David exceeded. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my seed and your seed forever." He arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city.